Welcome to Concussion Talk podcast, presented by HeadCheck Health. HeadCheck Health bridges gaps in concussion care through simple, powerful technology. Join organizations like the Canadian Football League, Track Factory Racing, the Canadian Junior Hockey League, Eastern Washington University, and Volleyball Canada, who rely on HeadCheck to improve concussion and optimize care. Visit headcheckhealth.com for more. I'm very excited to be doing episode 161 with Lauren Ziaks. But first, because I haven't talked to her in over a year now, but first, I'd like to encourage everybody to check me out on social media. So at Concussion Talk on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can search me on Nick Mercer on LinkedIn. What else? I think the T Public. So you go to T Public and search the Concussion Talk. You'll find my T-shirts and hoodies and other clothes that they sell, and that's at T Public. So there's that, and there's a good link on the bottom of this description of this episode. So thank you, and please subscribe, rate, and review of this podcast wherever you get podcasts. Good Pods, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, which is I don't plug my YouTube channel enough, but I have a YouTube channel as well. This is Concussion Talk podcast is on YouTube. So without further ado, I guess I get to Lauren, who's going to talk about the disorder, of the autonomic nervous system, which is known as dysautonomia, which she has experience with, and she has done a lot of research, and she has presented this research numerous times on this podcast. But I feel it's such an important topic, and Lauren knows so much about it that I think this speech is a great kind of primer necessarily, but an issue to be aware of for people who have suffered a brain injury. So please welcome Lauren Ziaks. Okay, so I'm on now with Lauren Ziaks, who is, geez, I'm going to say my old friend Lauren Ziaks. I guess old. She's not old. She's younger than me, so she's not the old friend. I'm the old friend. And I'm not really that old either, but anyway. But I haven't talked to her, and we're saying about a year now. But we're back now, and we're back talking about dysautonomia, and that's obviously I've seen a lot of people post about dysautonomia on Twitter and Instagram and stuff, and like concussion stuff. People are getting more, but dysautonomia is getting more renowned. So I think it's a great time for Lauren to, because first of all, it's time for a dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. What is dysautonomia?
Yeah, so like you said, a couple years ago, we were considered out in the trenches somewhere by ourselves, right? That we were talking about dysautonomia after concussion, and now, mostly thanks to COVID and everybody realizing how prevalent it is, especially with our long haulers, people are starting to pay attention, which is really exciting. So dysautonomia is an umbrella term that just means a disorder of your autonomic nervous system. So your autonomic nervous system controls your fight or flight and your rest and digest, or your sympathetic and parasympathetic. And if you think about that, it's like if you get nervous or scared, your heart starts to race, you start to get a little sweaty, right? And you get prepared to fight or flee. And then rest and digest, you eat a big meal, you feel a little groggy, you sit down, your blood flow goes to your core, and then that's when all your organs start to work to digest your food. So basically those two systems that are supposed to keep us just alive and basic level of functioning get out of whack, and the software running those programs stops working properly. So that's essentially dysautonomia.
Geez, Paul, that's and so I mentioned that Lauren has a cold now or flu. I don't know. We haven't diagnosed it yet, but
We
we
haven't
will.
diagnosed it.
She's blaming her son, but
Having a 1-year-old means I'm perpetually been sick for the last year.
exactly, yes. So, you actually, so I actually the first time I hunted you was the American DPTA thing about those short pockets they did with you calling yourself they called you the queen of concussions. So it was called, or they call me the queen of concussions. So you've had a bunch, and you have experienced dysautonomia yourself. So I guess you just talk about that, like your concussions and dysautonomia, or however you want to discuss it.
Yeah. So, my traumatic brain injury was my ninth concussion, and that was kind of the bottom, fell out of the bag concussion versus like some people have a more significant TBI because of one impact. Mine was a lot of impacts building up on top of each other. And then I, for the most part, was better. I was probably functioning at 75%, which given where I was started from, I was very happy with. But I just wasn't able to get healthy. I wasn't able to exercise. And after going to doctors for a decade, I had kind of given up and I just became more and more deconditioned. And unfortunately, that's the worst thing they could do for dysautonomia. So it just keeps getting worse and worse over time. We started seeing autonomic disorders in our clinic because of the level of injury that we treat in the concussion world. You can have someone who has a concussion, right? They don't have a bleed or a skull fracture, who has significant impairment where it's hard for them to read, it's hard for them to go to work. They might end up on disability, things like that. So sometimes that term concussion is a little bit misleading because they are brain injuries. And
Yeah.
so we started seeing more of these autonomic disorders, particularly in our chronic injuries, are people who were ill for more than 3 months. And in that process and learning more so that I could help my patients better, that's how I discovered that my mystery illness I had had for 10 years was postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or POTS, which is one
Um,
of the types of dysautonomia.
I was gonna say when we're doing the podcast about that,
Yeah.
because you've done the podcast, I was trying to figure out like what is the word? Like, don't do this to me, Nick.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't know what it stands for.
It was so early on when we did that
Yeah,
podcast.
totally.
We were like just learning. We were so
Yeah.
green.
Yeah. Anyway, just
Yeah, but so life really opened up after getting my diagnosis. And like most of my patients with autonomic disorders, whether it's from concussion, long COVID, Epstein-Barr, dysautonomia can come from any variety of prolonged bed rest or inflammatory responses. Most of us had signs of it ahead of time, right? Because they believe it's an autoimmune disease. So it'll be the people who say things like, well, I've always had a really high heart rate, but I was able to exercise. Or it always took me 5 to 7 minutes to warm up. The first mile of my run, I was always kind of dragging and then it would kick in, right? These things that we just take as throwaway comments that we think are normal because we've only ever experienced our own
yeah,
personal experience, right?
yeah.
And they're not normal, but you just wouldn't know. And it was so misdiagnosed for so long that even if you mentioned that to a doctor, they wouldn't have had anything probably of value to give you as an answer. So you have a triggering event like most autoimmune disorders, and then the disease really expresses itself, and that's when people's level of function changes. So that's what we're seeing, particularly again with the concussion, the long COVID, the post-vaccine illnesses, things like that. It's not that the vaccine or concussion or COVID is giving you the illness, it's that it's bringing to surface something that was already there underneath. And
Okay.
that's why it is important to take a full history of a patient, because you're able to get a much better profile. Most of us have allergies, we have other autoimmune conditions, we might have connective tissue disorders like hypermobility where our joints are really loosey goosey. There's all
Yeah,
other kinds of things that come along with it.
that's a physio term, is it? Loosey goosey.
Loosey goosey.
I've heard that physios use that a bunch. So mostly I'm unfamiliar with that one. But
The good news is if you have HEDS, once you get closer to 40 like me, your joints become less loosey goosey. So
okay, yes, went
you
over
just have to
40.
make it through.
I'm over 40, so so that's my joints are well not as not important. But yeah, but I was reading the John Hopkins, like, sorry, just before the expert came in, I was reading the Google expert, which was John Hopkins, and telling me that, saying that a lot of people like dysautonomia can be spread can be symptoms are chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic fatigue, and Guillain-Barré and Ehlers. You probably know it, but
Ehlers-Danlos syndrome,
no,
yeah.
it's not good. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah, the
So I
loosey-goosey
thought it
part.
was like I was like, they don't mention concussion, but concussion is not a symptom. It's a triggering event, really. Is it?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a triggering event, and then you're treating the dysautonomia. So the dysautonomia treatment in and of itself is its own thing, right? So it's not like I'm
Oh,
treating the concussion when I
yeah,
treat the person for their dysautonomia. It doesn't really matter what their triggering event was. Maybe they had monovirus as a
Yeah.
teenager, and it's, that we know that those viruses live inside of our body, and then you have a stressful event that triggers the virus to elicit these symptoms. So
Right.
whether it was a head injury or it was a post-viral infection, we're treating the dysautonomia essentially the same way based on the person sitting in front of us. And what's also really important right now, previously, one failure point we had in the medical community was if you didn't get diagnosed with OH, orthostatic hypotension, where your blood pressure drops, or POTS, where your heart rate goes really high, you were just sent home. So there was no treatment for you. And what we're now realizing is that orthostatic intolerance, which is people who don't meet those criteria, but they still have symptoms when they're upright or with activity, they're actually 85% of the patients. So we've been sending home 85% of people saying, you don't have POTS or OH, there's no
Yeah.
treatment for you. And luckily the community is shifting. So we're giving those people the space that they need. And what's really interesting in the clinic is the diagnosis itself doesn't seem to be that big of a predictor. Perhaps if it's a much more chronically ill person, but the people who are within a year, I've got patients who have orthostatic intolerance that are by far more impaired than my patients with POTS,
Hmm.
and vice versa. So you really want to be treating the person sitting in front of you versus what their diagnosis is,
Or standing
because
from the
we're standing in front of you, as it may be. But good point. But it might be that a person with POTS can actually start on a bike, right? Or they might be able to start walking,
Yeah.
whereas a person with orthostatic intolerance, who you would think would be less impaired, might actually have to start on their back, eliminating all gravity while they're exercising. So
Oh,
you really want to be looking at upright tolerance. What's their symptom burden? What are they able to accomplish in their day? And then modify the exercise or activity program to meet their needs, and then bring them all the way through to the end.
I was gonna ask you if you did last this is the last question before I ask you about your research, which I think is one of the main focus of this. Hopefully, will be the main focus of the podcast. But so is dysautonomia? Is it it's diagnosed? You doctor diagnoses it, or how is it diagnosed? Or
Yeah,
is
so
it diagnosable disorder?
it depends on your clinic. The way that our clinic runs, because of the time it takes for the test and the time it takes for the education, we actually run the orthostatic vital testing, meaning you lie down and then you stand up, and we take your vital signs, your blood pressure and your heart rate, and we collect your
Okay.
symptoms for 10 minutes in standing. And then we send that report to the physician, and the physician confirms it. Other
Okay.
places in the country, the testing is run through an autonomic lab.
Oh,
It
yeah.
used to be that the testing had to be performed on a tilt table, but there's been
Okay.
changes now in the community where they want us to do more community-based testing, because the average autonomic lab has a 6 to 12 month wait. In some parts of the United States, it's a 2 year wait.
Yeah.
And so we really want to be getting people diagnosed and into
Yeah.
treatment faster. I don't know where the pendulum's going to settle out on that, but ideally, if people are testing in the community, they're doing, the rigid protocol, and they're making sure that they're labeling things based on the cutoff scores.
Because you kind of feel like you can diagnose just on, well, not you personally, because you obviously you've had it but I mean
Yeah,
your clinic
yeah.
and
Oh,
your
yeah, you can
therapist.
diagnose it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And now we'll move on to your research. So the last we were talking before last year, Jenna Tucker and you, DPT Jenna Tucker, Doctor is it Doctor Jenna Tucker, and you, and we're talking about it. We're on talking about because you're going to do HRM or Chicago, was it?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
We went to
And
ACRM, American College of Rehab Medicine in Chicago. That was November, and then we went to the American
right,
Physical Therapy Association's combined sections meeting in February.
right. So which because I know that I got a bit I talked to you in June last year, and that was waiting for November. So, well, I guess you see, I think you're finished as your research then, but you presenting it. So what did you present at HRM and CSM? So what did you present about dysautonomia, those things? What do you think is the most important thing? Do you presented about obviously about exercise tolerance or intolerance, or however you want to say it? But yeah, I guess you can just kind of put back your Phoenix Concussion Recovery hat and lead us in this journey here.
Yeah, so at those two conferences, we did an introduction to how to identify dysautonomia, and then a start to the non-pharmacological management, the no drug approach.
Okay.
Because we're PTs, right? So it's not like we're
Yeah.
prescribing beta
Yeah.
blockers or blood pressure medicine. So we were
Listen.
staying in our lane. And so the big part right now is just improving awareness, right? Because people are seeing these patients, particularly people who treat more chronic concussion, people with protracted recovery, and then people who are treating post-viral illnesses are seeing these people in their clinic, and they don't quite know what it is. They know that there's a constellation or a collection of symptoms that don't quite sound right, and it's a lot of different body parts. They'll have GI problem or stomach problems, they'll have heart problems, they'll have activity intolerance, headaches, dizziness. They'll have weird swelling in their limbs, numbness and tingling that moves around their body, right? So the provider knows that there's something quite not right, but you have to know what the diagnosis is before you
Yeah.
can identify it in your patients, right? And so what's been really exciting is the attendance for these presentations. Like, people are really eager to know and to help their patients as much as they can. So the presentations were fairly similar at the two conferences. ACRM is for different allied health professionals, so it was more about the education of the patient. And then the APTA presentation was more about the exercise and the non-pharma management and how to diagnose, because it was for PTs. So it just kind of depends on the people who are sitting in the crowd, right? You
Yeah.
want to
Of course. Yeah.
present to them, but.
So you've been presented to the HRM was totally different, or just different, a more broader focus, or was it?
Yeah, more of a broader focus,
Yeah.
because we didn't do as much with the exercise portion, just because it could have been that it was a physician in the crowd
Oh
or an
yeah.
OT, or it could have been anybody, versus at the PT conference, like, that's our bread and butter, is the exercise
Well
portion,
then
right?
let's get into that then. So did you pull up some studies? Is it TSM? Pull up some studies. Well, not some studies. Your research, and so what? So what about exercise intolerance and because you seem to you obviously you're posting on Instagram your runs you're saying your heart rate's better now and it goes up and down and it's going better, it's getting steadier now. And is it just you're running a lot more, or is it that you're getting is it also triggering, not triggering, but kind of understanding your dysautonomia more?
Yeah, that's a lot of questions all
Yeah,
in
it is.
one.
Sorry about that. I get excited.
So for mine, it's different because I had a lot of setbacks along my process with different illnesses, and then I had the baby, and so,
Yeah.
like, it hasn't been necessarily like a normal trajectory for what my
Okay.
patients might
I'll
experience.
interrupt you one time. How did the baby affect your dysautonomia symptoms in your exercising post-race?
Oh, yeah, that was really rough. So, in what they don't tell you is that in the first trimester, the reason that you're so sick is because you have to double your blood volume, and your blood vessels have to dilate. They have to get bigger to accommodate that blood volume, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so people with POTS have poor blood volume and
yeah.
don't do well with vasodilation. So I had to disclose at work
They
at, like,
faint a
week
lot.
4. I was like, I just barely had a positive test and had to disclose it at work because I was so sick.
Did you
Everybody could tell
faint?
there was something wrong. Did I faint? No,
Yeah.
but my resting heart rate sitting was, like, over 100 for a couple weeks. Like, I was kind of
Mhm.
gray and, like, sweating and, like, breathing with my neck muscles, right? Like, it was
And your
not
blood
great.
pressure was like two,
Yeah, it was not ideal for
2/1.
a couple months. And then I just made sure to stay as active as I could safely, right? All the way through to the end, because that's the big thing for people. The early stages of dysautonomia are hard in that it's really hard for us to exercise, but exercise is what we need. Symptom guided exercise, right? We don't want to be crashing for 2 or 3 days. So it might be that we start, like, I started with 5 minutes intervals on a recumbent bike, which is an emotional burden, because before I got sick, I ran a marathon in 4 hours and 11 minutes.
Oh,
And
nice.
then I not to brag or anything. No one runs a marathon and doesn't talk about it, right? But but I went from that to 10 years later to be able to start exercising 5 minutes on a recumbent bike, and it would make me dizzy and feel as tired as if I'd gone for a run. And so, like, that's a heavy emotional and mental burden. Um, and that's a big part of the recovery process, and the lift that I have to do as a provider is to help motivate people to stay the course. because now I'm able to jog for the first time in over a decade, which is really exciting. I wouldn't say I'm going to run a marathon. I'm thinking about maybe a 5K this fall,
Yeah. Oh,
but
yeah.
but it's something that I didn't even think
Yeah.
was going to be an opportunity for me. And what's really important in the brain injury world is that we know from neurology that exercise, moderate intensity exercise, has a neural protective benefit long term in our lives, right? So that helps with the prevention of Parkinson's, MS, dementia, all kinds of things. And so with people with brain injuries, we're more susceptible to neurodegenerative diseases later in life, right? And
Right.
so my question, not to dumb it down too much, but my question is, are we so much more susceptible because most of us have exercise intolerance who
Yeah.
have symptoms long term, right? So if we can get people back exercising within that symptom threshold, can we start to reverse some of that literature long term about what our long term effects are going to be? I hope the answer is yes. Being a person who's had 13 head injuries,
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that finally being able to exercise is going to help me later on in life, right? So it's twofold. It's like increasing people's capacity now, but then what are our opportunities going to be later if we can start to turn these people around and get them back functioning? Maybe not the way they used to function, right? Like I said, like I'm never going to run a marathon again, also just because it was among the most miserable
I was gonna
experiences.
say, this is why.
But if I can exercise at moderate intensity for about 150 minutes a week, I
Yeah.
know that that's going to help protect me as I get older, from some of these debilitating diseases, which is really nice.
Because I remember last year when you and Jenna were talking about you had like, I don't know how many people on like the treadmill, and some people starting off and they're standing up, they're like in the 90, like 1998, like if they're like heart is at 98, and like, and then like they get up to take like 2 seconds, the treadmill goes like level two to be pooped, bit over
Yeah.
180.
Yeah. So our research that we did, we were the first that we know of to introduce signs of dysautonomia on the Buffalo concussion treadmill test.
Right.
So we took the treadmill test that's been well published and validated from Letty's group in Buffalo, and we were using it in our clinic, which is all chronic injuries. So totally different population because their research is the youth sports, predominantly male athletes, right?
Yeah.
And so what we found was just doing the protocol, the way it's written in the research, we were not getting the same results as what the research very concretely said we should be getting. And we were like,
Yeah.
well, what is happening here? And we were using for this study peripheral monitors, meaning like a finger monitor, because in the literature it says that you can do that, right? Or you can wear wearables like your Apple
Yeah.
Watches and things like that.
Okay.
And what happens in this subset of patients who have these signs of dysautonomia, they don't get enough blood flow to their hand, their perfusion, their blood flow coming in and out of their arms and legs isn't as good as a neurotypical person. And so we get these really weird readings. Like it'll say someone's oxygen is 65%. Well, of course it's not. They're walking on a treadmill and they're talking to me. So it's
Yeah.
highly unlikely that it's 65%. And so because of this research, we ended up moving to central monitors or chest strap monitors, which
Okay.
are actually a lot more affordable than a wearable device,
Really?
right? So a
And
Polar
more
H10,
accurate too.
and they're way more accurate
Yeah.
because the thing that they don't tell you about the wearables, first of all, they're optical sensors, right? That go on your wrist. That's that little green light you see at the bottom of your watch.
Okay. Oh yeah.
And so that's measuring the blood flow through the vessels. And they're not validated with activity. They're only validated at rest, which they don't tell you when they charge you $350 for them. Right? So
American.
I'm gonna
So
wake up dead in my bed one day. But
350 American.
yeah,
Canadian
350
side.
American. I don't know what that is in Canadian.
Oh, it's a
And
lot
then
more. Like $800. Or
but
no,
you
like
know, like a
I
Polar
don't
or a
know.
Garmin, which are validated against a 5-lead EKG, are like $80.
Yeah.
And they're waterproof and they're measuring, they're using what's called your V1 and your V2. So they're actually measuring 2 leads on a 5-lead EKG. So you're measuring the electricity of your heart. So they're by far more accurate. And that's actually what was a turning point for us in our research, was being able to truly measure what we think we're measuring and then make a very accurate prescription. And then for the most part, it's an affordable device. Obviously, there are some people who just can't have access, which is unfortunate. We can
Yeah.
use rating of perceived exertion for that. But we can make the exercise as tailorable and measurable as possible. And that seems to be what makes people move through the protocol faster. So the research that we did was we had one where we just introduced the signs, and then we had one that we published where we looked at their retest. So they took a test and then they took another test after going through this progressive protocol, and we were able to show significant signs of change in their response to exercise, which was really exciting. But it's the infant. Like, we need people with big grant funded studies, right? Like, I mean, I'm a researcher by twilight, so like it's not going to be me that does this work. I don't think, unless someone wants to give me a lab or
grant,
something.
yeah, let's online podcast grant application here. So give Lauren some money to do research on, and Lauren and Jenna.
Yeah, Jenna's got, she's in it now. She can't leave.
Okay, so Lauren and Jenna, give Lauren and Jenna some money to do dysautonomia research.
I've hooked my talons into Jenna, so she's in it for the long haul.
All right, well, she's gonna do her little plea too, and we'll get you some funds. I don't know if we because give myself some funds first, or not first, but as well. But so once you have this data about the dysautonomia, their exertion and their oxygen levels and their heart rate, what do you as physios do for that? Like, what do you do for, say, someone has not necessarily POTS or exercise intolerance, exercise intolerance, but like, yeah, actually, let's start with exercise intolerance. So what do you do with someone has that level of dysautonomia?
Well, almost everyone with dysautonomia is going to have exertional intolerance because their symptoms are worse when they're upright. And exertion might mean standing in the kitchen cooking dinner, right?
Yeah.
Exertion might mean going for a trail run for an hour and then having a headache afterwards. Like, it can mean anything. And there's some disagreement about the term exercise in general in the community, because exercise has such a big connotation of what that means. But to me, if you're on your back with your feet on the wall for 5-minute intervals, that is moderate intensity to you, that's exercise. You could call it activity, but to me, it's exercise, because you're actively working towards some type of fitness, right? And so you look at where the person is and what their symptoms are, and how long they can be standing. And then I've had the pleasure of being part of a work group between Intermountain and the University of Utah. And so we actually have released a protocol, the first new protocol in a long time for dysautonomia, called the Utah ADAPT protocol. And it's a physical therapy rehab. It's just the exercise portion. It is not a full preferred practice pattern, but it's a way to give a structural framework that's tailorable to each patient versus having a set treatment for everybody, no matter where they start and what they look like. So instead, it has functional measures, and then based on those outcomes, they enter a protocol that has 5 stages. And you enter the protocol wherever it's appropriate for you, and you exit the protocol wherever it's appropriate for you. So some of my patients don't have any interest in getting to 80% of their age expected max for 20 minutes, right? Which is from concussion literature. Some of my patients might want to be able to walk a mile a day, or they might want to be able to stand in the kitchen instead of sitting so they can cook dinner for their family. And that might be all they're looking for. So there's no point in pushing somebody in therapy to a point that they're never going to maintain. That's a waste of everybody's time and energy and money, right? And so why would I take somebody by far past what they're going to do after they're done with me? I'll just put you in the maintenance stage earlier and have you ride a bike for 20 minutes every other day for the rest of your life, kind of thing. And that's what's really cool, is once you're through the protocol, I mean, it's miserable to start, right? Having a chronic illness is expensive and isolating and hard, but once you're through all of that and you have the right treatment, when you're in the maintenance stage, the long-term maintenance is at least 20 minutes of moderate intensity exercise for the rest of your life, whatever that means to you. So that's pretty cool. Like, it's not drugs. It's not, some people are going to need meds, but like, for the most part, our goal is to wean you off of those things and have your nervous system reprogram itself. That's kind of cool. Like, there's other illnesses where you need insulin for the rest of your, like things like that, but it's just exercise.
So this is totally focused on exercise here as you research. But so you prescribe these 5 stages you were saying. So generally, what are sort of standard? What do you call them basically? That's why I
Yeah,
say,
so the first stage is called recumbent exercise. So or horizontal plane exercise. So if you think about your hemodynamics or the way your blood moves in your body, if you're standing upright against gravity, you're having to work the whole time to push that third of your blood volume back up into your core because gravity pulls your blood volume down into your legs. So a normal healthy person has tone in their vessels and they're pushing all that blood volume back up. For patients who have upright intolerance or dysautonomia or exertional intolerance, they struggle just at baseline to push that blood volume back up. And that's why we put compression on them, because the
okay,
compression does what their muscles and blood vessels should be doing.
okay.
And then we add salt because the salt pulls the fluids back into your blood vessels. That's why for a
I
healthy
noticed that
person,
in literature, so too, saying so high salt diet was a treatment. I was like, how's that treatment? That sounds like a bad news, but it's
yeah,
like,
I can have between 3 and 10 grams of salt a day because I have POTS, right?
yeah,
And so that would be like 8 servings of ramen noodles if I
yeah,
hit 10 grams. Yeah, it's
yeah,
a lot of salt, but it's fascinating because if my husband drank the salty water that I drink, he would be perpetually thirsty and he would be bloated and swollen,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And for me, drinking that salt makes me not feel thirsty and it makes my tissues feel better. So we just need like a little extra hug for our nervous system at baseline. And then so when you start in the horizontal plane, there's no gravity. So you're not having to work to just exercise, right? So that's why you start there. And that could be a pool. It could be that you're laying on your back, sliding your feet on the wall or sliding your feet on the ground. Then you go to recumbent exercise on like a recumbent bike where you're sitting back in those nice
Okay,
seats,
yeah.
or maybe a rower where you've got your arms and legs going, but you're seated and you're leaning back a little bit.
Doesn't
And
matter
then
that
you
in a
go,
rower you're pumping with the legs.
you're pumping with your legs. Yep,
Does that,
exactly. And you get a little bit of an arm workout too.
uh, does that matter to the pots? To the not the pots, but the yeah, dysautonomia. Does it matter that you're actually moving your legs like doing that? Instead of just
Yeah. Yeah.
that doesn't
You want to
affect
be moving
me.
your legs because you want to start to build that tone so that you can
Okay,
push that blood volume back up. So leg strengthening, lower abdominal
okay,
strengthening is really important. There's a thing called pelvic congestion syndrome. So they're now saying for the most part that lower abdominal compression with binders or compression shorts or things like that is more important than the lower legs. But then there's some of us like me where my lower legs swell quite a bit and they turn purple. It's called acrocyanosis. So I have to wear the socks
yeah,
because that's where my blood pools, right? So it just kind of depends on the person and what they need. And so then you go to the upright bike. So that's your first transition against gravity. So you're sitting, and
okay,
then you go to walking. And the goal for our ideal goal, and it may not be a reality for everybody, but our ideal goal for most people is that we get them to the walking stage because life is for the most part is upright.
yeah,
So you're walking to the grocery store, you're walking to class, you're leaving your car and going into your office building, whatever it is that you're doing, there's walking involved. So the goal is that we can get you to where you can exercise upright for 20 minutes every other day. And whether it stops there or whether you go to an hour of exercise, it just depends on the person and their goals, but trying to get you as upright as possible is the bulk of my job.
and then I guess the fifth stage is just higher. They do it at heart rate.
So
So
the fifth
running.
stage is interval training.
Okay,
Um, and so when they do interval training, what's really interesting is the interval day is actually the easier day
oh, yeah.
because they're alternating an interval day with a steady state day. A steady state day just means you do the same exercise for 20 minutes, right? Your heart rate stays in the same zone for 20 minutes straight.
Okay.
And so if your heart rate goal for your high interval and your heart rate goal for your 20-minute day are the same, then your interval day is the easier day, right? So it's kind of weird because when you're talking to a patient about their intervals, they're
Yeah,
like, "Oh, yes, I'm going to do intervals." And you're like, "Actually, that's going to be your easier
yeah,
day of
yeah,
the week because it's a 20 beat per minute difference, right? So you might be at 120 beats per minute on your high interval and 100 beats per minute on your low interval. But that's the really exciting stage because that's where you're working on your cardiovascular reserve and you're working on your heart rate flexibility. Like that's where you really start to get into the cool stuff. And the research is really good from cardiac rehab on the importance of interval training. It's just you have to be able to interval to something. So you can't
right.
do intervals earlier in the protocol because most patients are going to start. It's fascinating. No matter their age, they seem to start around 90 to 95 beats per minute, which is just wild. And I would love to know
Yeah,
more about why that is.
yeah,
Um, And so you're not intervaling at 90 to 95 beats per minute. There's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So you have to wait until you're at least 115, 120 because you need 20 beats per minute difference between the high number and the low number. Or you'll be, just laying there, not
Yeah.
moving at all, and then exercising and then not
Yeah.
moving at all, right?
So do you, my last question about your dysautonomia research, because you've been on for a while now, I guess. But yeah, so do people drop out of your clinic, not drop out of your clinic, being like drop out of your program protocol? For you, do they seem to drop out at like 3 or 4, or do they, you say, because you mentioned people at 5 like indigency or intervals, so they must have some patients at 5. But
Yes.
do you tend to see people drop out at earlier stages?
You do. Like if somebody has another inflammatory episode, or maybe it's not the right time in their life to be really consistent, or maybe they have other medical challenges going on. And
Right.
so we pause on therapy and they focus on other things. Those are typically the people, obviously, cost sometimes with how expensive healthcare is in the US. That can be a big part of why people drop out. But for the most part, what I try to do is get them to intervals, and then I'll do one visit after intervals where we'll talk about maintenance, because at that point, for most patients, you're really dealing with strength and conditioning as much or more than you're dealing with their dysautonomia. You're going to hit, and it depends on how long you've been sick, right? But if you've been sick for 2 years and walking for 5 minutes is hard before we get started, after
Yeah.
2, 3 months, 4 months of treatment, it's not like you've built 3 years of capacity in those 4 months, right?
Yeah.
And so you're gonna hit a point where you're gonna the conversation that usually ends our course of care is, "Hey, I'm doing really well. My symptoms feel better. I can function more. I have more capacity at the same symptoms." Those are both positive signs. It's just 2 different types of people. Some people don't want to exacerbate their symptoms. Some people want as much capacity as possible, and so their symptoms kind of plateau, right? And then they'll say things like, I just can't maintain for 20. I'm not ready to increase. My heart rate control looks good. They're hitting all their measures, but they don't think they can do the next 5 beats per minute for 20 minutes straight because of exertion. It's too much work, right?
Oh, okay.
And so if that's the case, then I'm really done. Like you're in the maintenance phase. I want you to keep going at whatever feels good. Don't give yourself, a quad tendon tear. Like, make good choices, do your strengthening 2 to 3 times a week, but you don't really need me anymore. You know how to read your graphs, you know how to manage your symptoms, you know how to pace yourself. And now it's just building capacity over the next couple of months, maybe a year, depending on how long you've been sick. And so when I no longer serve a purpose, I just kind of like fade to black. I'm just, bye.
It's like consistency, so it's key, right? It's all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
You have to be consistent or you're going to come
yeah,
back and hang out with me again. And so my goal for that last visit is to go through the long-term maintenance, prep them for the regressions that are going to happen. You're going to get sick. You're going to have something happen. You'll have a death in the family and you miss your exercise for a week. Whatever it is, how are you going to self-manage so you don't have to come back and hang out with me, and so you don't end up on that slippery slope of deconditioning again, which will make your dysautonomia worse. And then as soon as we
I
have
think
that
people want to hang out with
conversation,
you all the time. People want to hang with you more than you think, Lauren.
they don't. I promise you, you don't. My jokes get very old very quickly. 6, 7 visits, that's all I'm really good for. After that, you don't want to be with me anymore.
Oh
And it
yeah,
might be that I'm only seeing a patient once a month, or I might be seeing a patient every other week. It just kind of depends on how fast they are making progress between visits. The most unpredictable part of the protocol is truly that first stage. If you are starting at 5-minute intervals or 10-minute interval, if you're not even able to go for 20 minutes, you're in what's called the preconditioning stage, which is great. But you might be there for a week and you might be there for 3 months. So that's the most unpredictable. It's like, how long is it going to take you to be able to do 20 minutes in one session without needing a break? Once you can do that, we start to really pick up speed. So that's what I always prep patients with in the first visit is like, it's this preconditioning, it's building you to 20 minutes without a break, without your symptoms increasing more than 3 points. Once we're able to do that, I'll be able to predict how long you're going to take. It's just that first stage. And a lot of that is the emotional or mental burden, right? Like we talked
yeah,
about at the beginning of, this is hard and why is this so hard? And the
yeah.
emotional piece
Didn't
of,
used to be as hard.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. Again, it's hard and expensive to be sick, and so
Yeah.
there is a lot of heavy lifting on the front end, and then when people are feeling healthy and they're doing better, there's not very much lifting at all. That's when they get discharged from therapy and they manage themselves.
We could do like a whole podcast series on just on dysautonomia. But I'm my podcast is called Concussion Talk, so I gotta be a bit broader and it's still narrowish topic. But
Well, but
yeah,
let's circle back to that real quick. So, if
yes,
you have a head injury, right? You
yes,
probably and you are struggling for a prolonged period of time, not
yeah,
that first 2, 3 weeks where
yeah,
people will spontaneously get better,
yeah,
but you probably will have multiple domains involved. So, the other big thing, and we have this written in our protocol, and we really want people to be thinking about this, is you should also be looking at their vestibulocular motor systems. You should be looking at their neck. You should be looking at their motor function, right? All the other domains as well, because exertional autonomic is just one of the APTA's domains. And so you want to make sure that you're treating the whole person. So maybe there's someone on your team who's really good at dysautonomia, and then there's somebody else on your team that's really good with their vision of vestibular therapy. You want to make sure people are getting serial exams or exams over time to make sure
yeah.
you pick up on all of their driving factors. So that's just one little plug for the brain injury community, is that
Oh
we
yeah.
are multifaceted people.
We got to figure out how to get you because I mean, once a year with you is not enough. So we got to figure out. We got another time.
Once a year with me, most people would think is enough.
I mean, but it's incredible. We're like what, like 5,000 miles away. So so I can take it more probably than most people. But or maybe more than 5,000 miles. Probably 5,000. Anyway, I don't even know miles. I don't know miles away. I'll just see American talking American now. Miles and pound, not pound, how big is pounds? Like, but there's
We're 6,000 football fields away.
yes,
No,
exactly. Yes, you football fields. Maybe more than that. The 6,000. Football fields would be like thousand, so that's 100 yards. So it's just that's like 300 feet. How many feet are in a mile?
again, I don't know.
How many
That's
yards?
above my pay grade.
Okay. Well, let's leave it at that then. So, uh, what's next for Lauren and for Phoenix Concussion Recovery if that's like if you're still doing that?
I am still doing Phoenix. What's next is just continuing to build up some research and, wherever we can, or sparking other people who have labs and are excited about this stuff to do the research so that we can get patients the best care and do some validation studies on these protocols that are coming out. So just keep chugging away, treating my patients over at the hospital and educating providers and doing whatever I can to play a role.
And also, if anyone's listening, if you give Jenna and Lauren some money, they can do some real good research with Buffalo terrible tests and like a whole bunch of subjects in their study. Like, you can do 1,000-person study. It's
A
something you
1,000-person study. That'd
well,
be a long study.
well, if they give you enough money though, then you can take the time. But so it depends on how much that'd be good. 1,000 people would be very solid. So
That would be a very solid. That would be a long study, but that would be a
we're
very
rather
solid
take you
study.
away from your treatment of patients you love. I know.
Yeah.
So I know on all physicists love that. So maybe not that, but anyway, get them some grant money and they're doing more research. And yes, and if also wants to hear about the Lauren and Dysautonomia, you can check her out at the phoenixconcussion.com. Is there much dysautonomia research? I haven't checked that. I've seen a while.
Now I gotta update. I'm gonna put some more information about dysautonomia on the website. I've just been slow to do that. The having this
Oh,
1-year-old has really
yeah, yeah.
taken some wind out of my sails,
Charlie's giving me like a cold, and now we take even dysautonomia research. And they would have Charlie on next time we'll have to talk to him. Ask him why he's doing this. What's the deal? What's up? What's going on, Charlie? You don't like dysautonomia? What's your problem? But so yeah,
Well,
we
thanks
gotta
for
get this.
having me on here today. It was
Oh,
nice
well,
to be
dude,
back.
I know it's been way long. We got to figure out a way to get Johnny again this year, and yeah. But for now, everyone, thank you for listening, and And thank Lauren, we'll be back this year. We'll find a way. If not, maybe with Charlie and Scott and
that'd be quite the podcast.
that'd be fun. They Scott be like, I want to be here. Charlie be like, give me a cold and stuff and interrupting research. But I think it'd be fun. For now, so thank you very much, everybody, and I'll see you again soon. And thank you, Lauren.